crossing Scotland this evening. Northern England seeing some heavy downpours too. You might even hear a crack of thunder here and there. Just generally staying cloudy, with outbreaks of rain on and off through the night. That breeze, the cloud, all helping to keep the temperatures up. A much milder night than we've had by morning. Temperatures 7 or 8 degrees in the east, double figures further south and west. But as I said, it won't necessarily feel that mild because it's going to be cloudy and for many a wet start to the day. That rain on and off across northern Scotland, but some drier spells. Another pulse of heavier rain coming into southwest Scotland and Northern Ireland. Could be a very wet start to the morning rush hour here. There'll be some heavier outbreaks of rain too, crossing western England and Wales. Parts of eastern England, generally dry but fairly drab. But as I say, you'll notice that jump in temperatures compared to recent mornings. Some of that showery rain will work its way into eastern England. Heavier pulses of rain, the brighter colours there across northern England, parts of Wales. Northern Ireland cheering up for a time, but then more showers come in here later on. Wales, western parts of England do look a bit brighter come the end of the day. And look at that, it's milder. Temperatures in double digits pretty much across the board, and many places getting into the teens. Friday also looking mild, but also looking wet. There's Met Office warnings in place for the wind and the rain across parts of the west, and it will be a very wet day in western areas. Much of the east of England staying dry on Friday until late on, but it's going to be a blustery day wherever you are. But those winds coming up from the south, so again on Friday it will be much, much milder than it has been.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Want to be one of 2 lucky Great British Giveaway winners? That's right, you could win one of 2 prize bundles, which includes a brand new iPhone 16, £500 in shopping vouchers to spend in your favourite store, and an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. What would you spend that cash on? For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, everybody. You're watching State of the Nation tonight with me, Matt Goodwin, right here on GB News, the show that speaks up for you, the forgotten majority. On tonight's show, as yet another case emerges of a migrant avoiding deportation because of the European Convention on Human Rights. Tonight, we're going to be debating whether it is time to leave this foreign and unaccountable convention. Now, radical left-wing MP Zara Sultana has accused the Reform Party, get this, of being comparable to the National Front and the British National Party, following a sinister Twitter post of Nigel Farage. We'll be debating that tonight. I'm also going to be joined by the Daily Wire host Michael Knowles following his merciless takedown of Rory Stewart. Hilarious. We're going to be looking at that and speaking to Michael directly tonight. And as Donald Trump's Department for Government Efficiency, or DOGE, cuts funding from Rory Stewart's wife, we're going to be talking about what that means for British politics. And Nigel Farage has warned this week at an important conference that British people should be having more children to save what he calls Judeo-Christian culture amidst our birth rate crisis. But can the nation turn our collapsing birth rate around? That's State of the Nation tonight with me, Matt Goodwin, starts right now. Now, I'm going to be joined tonight by my stellar top panel columnist and former MEP Patrick O'Flynn and the founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani. As ever, let me know your views at gbnews.com/your say, and of course hit me up on X at GoodwinMJ. But right now, it's time for the News Bulletin with Sam Francis.
Matt, thank you, and good evening to you. It's just after 8 o'clock. Well, the top story tonight, opposition figures have criticised Donald Trump after he called Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky a dictator in a post on Truth Social. Kemi Badenoch rejected the claim, saying Zelensky is Ukraine's democratically elected leader, while urging Sir Keir Starmer to increase defence spending. Meanwhile, leader of the Lib Dems, Ed Davey, has also condemned Trump's comments, calling for others to also do the same. Downing Street, though, hasn't commented so far, as the Prime Minister's preparing to meet Trump in Washington next week. UK inflation has jumped to 3%. That is the fastest rise in 10 months, driven by soaring food prices, airfares and private school fees. With energy, water and council tax bills also set to rise in April, households are bracing for more pressure on budgets. Meanwhile, businesses say higher wages and national insurance hikes could push prices up even further. The government's warning the road to low inflation will be bumpy, while political parties trade blame over tax and spending policies. Retailers selling knives online will face stricter laws, as a review has found it's easier for children to buy blades than it is paracetamol. New rules mean tougher prison sentences for selling knives to under 18s and a legal duty for retailers to report bulk or suspicious purchases. The crackdown follows tragedies linked to unlicensed knife sales, as the government's vowing to protect young people from crime. In Scotland, a 74-year-old woman has become the first person there to be arrested under new abortion buffer zone laws. Police were called to the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow after reports of an anti-abortion protest. The woman was arrested for breaching the exclusion zone, which prevents protesters from gathering within 200 metres of abortion clinics. The Safe Access Zones Act, passed last year, aims to protect women from harassment when accessing healthcare services. England's life expectancy is plunging down the European rankings, and obesity is a key culprit. A major study in The Lancet has revealed people in the UK now live around 9 months less than they did in 2011, as decades of progress is grinding to a halt. Poor diets and a lack of exercise are taking their toll, with the sharpest drop recorded between 2019 and 2021. It means that out of 20 European countries recorded, England's decline is the worst. And the BBC is facing calls to pull a documentary from iPlayer over claims it features the son of a Hamas leader. A letter to the Director General Tim Davies, signed by actress Tracy Ann Oberman and producer Neil Blair, among others, is demanding an investigation into the programme called Gaza: How to Survive a War Zone. They question whether the BBC knew that its narrator, Abdullah, is allegedly the son of Hamas's deputy minister. The signatories of that letter say the programme should be removed until a full review is carried out. The BBC, though, have been contacted for comment and not replied so far. That's the news on GB News, a full roundup of all the top stories at 9 o'clock. Now, though, it's over to Westminster and Matt.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation tonight with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, another day goes by and another case emerges of a failed deportation. This time, a failed Iraqi asylum seeker has been allowed to stay in the UK because, get this, his mother, who still lives in Iraq, refused to hand over his ID documentation to the court, bolstering his supposed claim that his life would be under threat if he returned to his home country. As a result, the upper tribunal judge ruled that returning the man to Iraq would be a breach of, as usual, Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights. And I quote, "No one shall be subjected to torture or to inhumane or degrading treatment or punishment in all circumstances." Everybody apparently except the British people. But this comes after countless other cases of avoided deportations that have made a mockery of our judicial legal system. Whether it's the Albanian criminal whose son didn't like foreign chicken nuggets, remember that one, or the Nigerian woman who was allowed to stay after joining a terrorist group. It's clear that our asylum system is broken. All roads are leading back to one place, the European Court of Human Rights, the ECHR. Now, the ruling elite loves to remind us that it was an invention of Winston Churchill's. You always hear that one, don't you? But anyone with any sense of history knows that Churchill himself would be horrified by what we see around us today in this once great country of ours. The original convention was a noble document, but the court's interpretation follows the living instrument doctrine. In other words, it's free to invent new rights that it believes is in the spirit of the original convention. Take, for example, Article 8, the right to family life. Well, that article was originally written to protect against totalitarian surveillance states. But the court now interprets it to apply to everything from noise abatement to eviction, for non-payment of rent to, crucially, deportations. We've seen the legal system expand massively and become increasingly political. It's precisely because of Article 8 that it's impossible to deport so many illegal migrants and foreign national offenders who are here in the UK. But the Human Rights Act, passed under Tony Blair, forces all court judgments to adhere to this increasingly deranged foreign and unaccountable court. So listen, the only way, I think, to restore common sense to our immigration system, also to our legal system, to deport the more than 1 million illegal migrants who are here in the UK, to stop those small boat crossings in the Channel is, and I've said it again, I'll keep saying it until somebody out there does it, is by leaving the European Convention on Human Rights and repealing the Human Rights Act. Our leaders know this, the legal system know this, but of course they're choosing not to do what needs to be done to keep the British people safe and secure. Now, as ever, let me know your views at gbnews.com/yoursay, or tweet me at GoodwinMJ. Now, I'm joined down the line, before turning to my panel, by Krish Kandia, founder of the Sanctuary Foundation, a refugee charity. Krish, every day, I appreciate we obviously have different views on this, but every day, people watching the show, and more generally, British taxpayers, are reading one of these stories after another. Some ridiculous case, some ridiculous reason as to why somebody is being allowed to stay in the UK. Enough is enough, surely.
Well, sometimes those cases are framed in deliberately provocative ways. So, for example, the case you just mentioned of the Iraqi young man, it sounded like it was because he couldn't find his ID or his mother wouldn't hand his ID over. Actually, the court case said his mother was terrified of him facing torture. That was the main reason. That's why she didn't hand over the ID. Well, there was a story this week about a Jamaican drug dealer, and they said, oh, he couldn't be repatriated because he'll only smoke marijuana and he won't do Class A drugs. And actually the reason was he had 3 children who are 7, 4 and 1, and those children have right to access of their parent. So I can't believe we're arguing that there ought to be less human rights in the world, Matt. And I can't even believe that we think we should have less connections with Europe at the moment when we've lost our backing of America. Surely we want a closer working relationship with Europe. We want to protect human rights wherever possible. And we need to stop framing this as some kind of anti-woke, anti-national legislation. As you said, one of the greatest heroes and patriots of our time was involved in the founding of that document because he recognised that we need to protect the human rights of everybody, not just
Krish,
the people
as I've just said, though, if Winston Churchill were here today, let's just be honest with one another. I know we have different political views, but let's just at least be honest with one another. If Winston Churchill was here today looking at how the ECHR has been applied to keep people in this country, for example, people whose children don't want to eat foreign chicken nuggets, or Jamaican drug dealers who don't want to be deported back because that might violate their right to a family life while ignoring all of the families in this country that they've decimated by dealing Class A drugs. Do you think Winston Churchill would be on this show right now saying, hey, Krish, you're right, this is exactly what I wanted to happen?
Look, Winston Churchill took our country into war because he thought that the human rights of everybody in Europe mattered. Whether they were in Poland, whether they were Jewish, everybody mattered, and therefore it was worth fighting tyranny wherever possible. So I actually do think he would. But which bit of this statement...
So you think Winston Churchill would be nodding his head while he's reading the Telegraph saying, this guy's son, who doesn't want to eat foreign chicken nuggets, should be allowed to stay in the UK? You really think Winston Churchill would be down for that?
I don't think he'd probably read the Telegraph. But look, Matt, which bit of this statement do you disagree with? No one shall be subjected to torture or to inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. Which bit of that is offensive?
Can I ask a question in reply to that, Krish? So, inhumane treatment, torture. What about the British taxpayers and the British people who are subjected to criminality, to drug dealing, to people breaking our laws and who are then allowed to stay in our national community? What about those people?
Look, if someone commits a crime, wherever they're from, whatever their immigration status, they need to be locked up. That's appropriate. And to blame all crime on immigrants is xenophobic.
Nobody said that. I'm just asking you a question. If somebody comes into Britain illegally on the small boats...
If someone has committed a crime, they need to be punished. That's appropriate. There's a law. There's a legislature for that. But we're saying everyone's human rights matters, even if you're accused of a crime. Look, Nelson Mandela was accused of being a terrorist, and yet we need to uphold his human rights.
I understand what you're doing, but nobody in this debate is saying human rights don't matter. Nobody is saying people should not have human rights. One thing we could do
to human rights. Why diminish
one thing we could do, Krish.
What are you going to replace it with?
Krish, as you know, one thing we could do is we could reform the Human Rights Act, so we could make sure that we're not subservient to the ECHR as part of that. We could introduce even a new Human Rights Act, but which establishes the primacy of UK laws and conventions over and above those coming from Europe. We could preserve and protect human rights while not being part of this crazy regime that prevents us from controlling our own borders and deporting foreign criminals.
Basically, that says we should be allowed to mark our own homework and shouldn't be accountable to anyone else except our own law courts. Is that right?
Well, I'm a big believer in judicial sovereignty. I'm a big believer in the independence of our legal system. There are lots of countries around the world that are not members of the ECHR who preserve and promote and defend human rights.
Do you think the Nuremberg trial should have taken place? Was it appropriate for someone else to judge the Nazis for the way they treated people in their own country?
I'm not sure why we're talking about the Nuremberg trial, Krish. I'm talking about what we do right now with 1.2 million illegal migrants in this country. And more fundamentally, Krish, to be frank, what I'm really concerned about, Krish, what I'm really concerned about is the erosion of public trust in the entire system because of these cases. And I think where human rights advocates such as yourself do need to step back and look at this. If we continue as we are every day reading these crazy, absurd stories, the end result will be a collapse of public trust in the entire system, the legal system, policing, the immigration system, because you can sense already the British people are at breaking point. And if the judiciary, the legal system continues to jam this stuff down people's throats, I don't think you're looking at the long game here, and the long game will be a collapse of public trust.
Look, I want there to be public trust. I think maybe as much as you do. And therefore, the framing of some of these stories to make the law look ridiculous is actually unhelpful. You don't tell the whole story, you don't tell what's happened. You just reframe it so it looks worse than it is. Like we said about the Jamaican drug dealer, it was framed as he was willing to stay in the country only if he had marijuana instead of having Class A drugs. That wasn't actually what the judgment was about, but that was the Telegraph headline. And this story is about a mother desperately worried that her son will be put in prison and tortured. And it's not about the ID card, it's about her worry for him. And the judge actually believed that as credible.
Well,
so
we will
want
thank you.
Trust, we've got to tell the whole truth, Matt.
Thank you, Krish. We will, of course, let people out there make up their minds as to whether they want Jamaican drug dealers and Iraqi criminals in the country. But thank you, as always, for your time. After the break, get this, a radical leftist MP has compared Nigel Farage and the Reform Party to the far-right National Front and the British National Party, the BNP. I'm going to be debating that right here with my top panel, Aaron Bastani and Patrick O'Flynn. So come back in a couple of minutes.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
It's also about how children are taught to behave towards people who claim that they have a different gender to their biological sex. And what I'm really concerned about is particularly girls being told that they shouldn't challenge, say, a man in their changing rooms or a boy in their toilets because that is unkind. Joanne, do you think that's actually setting up girls to put themselves in danger for the so-called purpose of being kind?
Again, what you're doing here is you're using these very obtuse type comments to try and paint trans people as some sort of predators and going
I'm
into
trying to say that there's a reason that we have single-sex spaces, and if girls are socially conditioned not to uphold those single-sex spaces, we are going to have a huge safeguarding challenge.
So it's important that the education we're providing around gender identity, even non-trans people, about understanding your sense of self, I think is really important. I think schools today are doing a far better job than they did when I was younger in the 60s. So I'm not an education profession specialist in this area. I would advocate that education needs to represent the real world, and trans people are in the real world. If it means making girls more aware of their own sense of self, empowering them, giving them, working with them to...
Helen,
so
how is this empowering girls?
Say again?
I just said, moving on to Helen, how is this empowering girls?
This language of empowerment is not the right starting point when you're talking with children. Adults and children have totally different duties and responsibilities and rights and needs. In schools, it's up to the grown-ups to set rules that keep everybody safe. It's not possible to keep everybody safe if you pretend that some boys can be girls and some girls can be boys. That doesn't mean being mean or unkind.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back, everybody, to State of the Nation tonight with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, we've just been discussing the ECHR and the latest lunacy that has come out of that. Now, Andy has written in, he says, the lawyers like Keir Starmer and his friends do not want us to leave the ECHR because it's a gravy train paid through legal aid. Another viewer says Article 8 of the Human Rights gives plenty of get-out clauses in order to allow the deportation of dangerous terrorists, rapists, murderers, criminals on the basis of national security. It is the judges, immigration panels who are subverting the law and relying on the good behaviour of the public in not calling out sabotage of our national security. Keep your views coming in. Of course, you can hit me up on X at GoodwinMJ. But now, the debate I've been looking forward to all day, as the Labour Party attempts to battle off scandal after scandal, one of its former MPs, Zara Sultana, who has had the whip withdrawn, published this image on X today. Indeed, look at that. GB News reached out to her for comment, and she replied to us tonight with the following. In my view, based on the comments they have made publicly about Muslims and migrants, Reform UK is comparable to the National Front and the British National Party. We pushed back against them before and we'll do it again. But Zara Sultana has a history of some pretty ugly views herself. In 2019, she was exposed to have said that she would celebrate the deaths of Tony Blair and Benjamin Netanyahu, and said, I quote directly, "The sooner they meet their creator, the better. The concepts of justice and accountability don't truly exist in this life, only in the next." Not to mention some pretty dubious comments about people who have expressed support for Israel, suggesting to one of them that they should jump off a cliff. Well, I'm joined now by my panel columnist and former MEP Patrick O'Flynn and the founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani. Patrick, Reform exactly the same as the National Front and the BNP?
I mean, that's ludicrous. Throughout every political vehicle that he's been involved with, Nigel Farage has been a civic nationalist and not an ethnic nationalist. Now, oddly at the moment, because of left-wing overreach, we are starting to see the birth of a bit of a revival of white ethno-nationalism in Britain, but the people who are pushing that are tearing their hair out that Nigel Farage will go nowhere near them. And the truth is that the revival of this ethno-nationalist, National Front style, if you like, has been prompted by the outrageous overreach of the political left on issues like human rights, on suppressing the data about the foreign crime waves in this country. They are the ones who are stoking this. I do think, that image of Nigel Farage as the sort of bad boy with the sort of the highway code, I can't remember what that means, but it's a kind of a go against him sign. I mean, that's almost like perfect branding for Nigel. I think he'll connect with many more voters than Zara Sultana will. And a final point, I noted that she goes on and on in her statement about being from Birmingham, because this is about a reform gathering in Birmingham. She represents a seat in Coventry. I know, as someone who used to report in the West Midlands, if you're trying to represent Coventry, you don't go and tell them you come from Birmingham, or you get very unpopular very quickly.
Aaron?
I don't really care. I mean, I don't really care what Zara Sultana thinks of Nigel Farage. I don't really care what Nigel Farage thinks of Zara Sultana. I think there's a bit of snowflakery going on. The things that you just cited, I didn't know you're such a big fan of Tony Blair. Obviously, I don't wish anybody ill or to die. But again, there's an element
I'm not, to be clear, I'm not a fan of Tony Blair. I just don't think we should be saying we're going to celebrate when the guy dies, which is what Sultana seemed to say. But you say you don't care, but there are, let's be clear, right? There are more than 200,000 members of the Reform Party. There are millions of Reform voters, many of whom will be watching this show.
And they're leading in some polls, they're leading most polls,
and they will feel outraged by, again, a sort of smear, a slur, association with people like, Nick Griffin and John Tyndall from the National Front. I mean...
Will they feel outraged? I mean, I just think...
Well, I feel irritated on their behalf, because I know many Reform people, and I know they're nothing like the people that I actually met during my PhD thesis. I interviewed lots of people in the BNP and the National Front, and they were a world away from the people that I see at Reform events.
Well, it's important to say that Nigel Farage has put distance between himself and, say, something like Tommy Robinson. Very recently, in fact. What you could say is that Reform swim in those waters. You're welcome to say that or disagree with it. That's just, again, it's just an opinion. We can discuss opinions. But for me, this is almost at odds with the political reality, which is Reform are now leading in the polls. Reform could form the next government in this country. They could be a majority government. And that's why I want to see more policy from Reform. I want to see more substantive stuff from Reform. And in a way, this kind of thing is actually quite useful for Nigel Farage. It keeps him in the media spotlight without actually having to answer the question, what will you do? What will you do if you run this country? How will you run it differently to the Tories and Labour?
Before we get back to that, let's just keep our eyes on Labour for a minute, because the scandals don't seem to end with the comments today. Yesterday, the Prime Minister tweeted this picture. Now, he wrote, "Great to meet British Muslim leaders from across business and civil society today to discuss my plan for change." Now, the woman to his left in that picture is Seema Aslam, director of the Bradford Literary Festival. Now, it's emerged several years ago that she tweeted this: Islamophobia is more dangerous than ISIS. ISIS will burn out, but Muslims are underestimating the far-right threat. Aaron, Islamophobia, more dangerous than ISIS?
I'm not inclined to agree with that. But again, so what? Like, if somebody...
She sat next to the Prime Minister.
If somebody tweets something which you think is a bit daft, by the way, I've tweeted many daft things, we probably all have.
I'm aware of how daft you are on X, Aaron.
Yeah, they're before the grace of God, Matthew. Look, the point of Twitter is almost to tweet daft things.
But there's a serious point here. This person is sat next to the Prime Minister, and that does reflect a view within British Muslim communities and parts of the Labour Party that Islamophobia is the dominant threat. Even more serious, she says, than ISIS.
Does she still believe that? I mean, I don't know. I could post dozens of your tweets or dozens of Patrick's tweets, and you say, actually, I'm not quite sure I really think that.
I stand by everything I've ever said on X.
Yeah, me too. I'm just disturbed by it. I'm also disturbed by the very concept of this meeting, that you bring in a discrete religious group faction, which is the group in society where everyone would admit there's been trouble with integration, and you're encouraging the idea of a bloc, right, of Islamic interests. We know there's a lot of pressure from some people within that community for blasphemy laws, for instance. We know whenever there's an Islamist terror outrage, there's scant condemnations that go on through groups like the Muslim Council of Britain, and they try and get the debate on as quickly as possible to backlash against moderate Muslims.
You wouldn't see Starmer sitting down saying, I'm sat with a group of British Christians.
Or farmers, or all sorts of people that he's constantly
He might have been talking about the need for a national inquiry on the rape gangs. Who knows, Aaron? I mean, Patrick's got a point, hasn't he?
I actually agree with you about the nature of this kind of communitarian politics, but we do often see Labour sat down with Jewish leaders or British Indian leaders. We do hear that all the time, sadly. So I think that's actually quite a commonplace feature of our politics. You might not like it. I don't think it's particularly productive. But this is not unique.
Well, thank you to my panel. Now, in a moment, I'm going to be speaking to the man of the moment, Daily Wire host Michael Knowles, about his takedown. If you've not seen it, it's incredible. We're going to show you a bit of Rory Stewart following the defunding of his wife's charity by none other than Donald Trump. It was a glorious moment in politics. Join us in a couple of minutes.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News travel destinations forecast.
Winds from the north will bring a real chill to Greece and Turkey over the next few days. Meanwhile, plenty of sunny skies in Spain. There's that northerly wind making many of the Greek islands colder than the UK. Certainly chillier across parts of Croatia. Some sunny spells in Italy, along with a few showers. Fine and sunny weather for the Balearics and southern Spain, along with the Canaries. And the breeze here will be easing. But that cold wind will continue to blow across the Greek islands into the weekend.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News travel destinations forecast.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation,
no,
isn't it?
No,
Because the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. I mean, maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Very good evening. We will return straight back to Matt in Westminster shortly. But first, just an update on breaking news here in the GB newsroom. The latest on the ongoing political clash between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. We have now heard from Downing Street that Sir Keir Starmer, Prime Minister here in the UK, has called Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukrainian president, to express his support for Ukraine and for his role as, he says, the Ukrainian democratically elected leader. That statement just in to us from Downing Street. Let's bring you part of that statement now. It reads, the Prime Minister has spoken to President Zelensky tonight, stressing the need for everyone to work together, and that the Prime Minister has expressed his support for Zelensky as the democratically elected leader, adding that it is perfectly reasonable to suspend elections during wartime, much as the UK did during the World War II. So that latest line just into us, that Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has now entered the ongoing political debate between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky, adding his support and backing to Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine. We are expecting later tonight to hear from Donald Trump himself speaking in Miami, and we will, of course, bring that to you as it happens. Now, though, let's return straight back to Matt in Westminster.
Well, thank you, Sam, for that breaking news. Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, Donald Trump has been very busy tearing up the international liberal consensus, and he appears to have upset a former British politician. My next guest has revealed the truth behind this development. Check this out.
Here is Rory Stewart explaining his connection to USAID.
Stopped. Doesn't matter. You have a contract. So, Turquoise Mountain, which my wife Shoshana runs, has a contract. Had another $1 million to go. Money just stops.
The Turquoise Mountain Foundation exists to teach Afghani peasants about degenerate modern art.
So this is in some ways often called the first piece of conceptual art. Does anyone know what it is?
That's where your money's gone. Your money is going, or was going until Trump got hold of it, to pay off the wives of British politicians turned Yale professors to teach Afghanis who probably have more important things on their mind about how perverse Western anti-artists decided to pretend that urinals and toilets were, Caravaggio paintings in the early 20th century.
What a world. I'm joined now by Michael Knowles, host of The Michael Knowles Show at the Daily Wire. Michael, well, I must have watched your video about 20 times today. I think you've done us some national service by taking down Rory Stewart in such beautiful fashion. There is a serious point behind this, though, isn't there? Which is, where on earth has this money been going?
I think I might be the only person in politics or media who was not on the take from USAID. It is amazing what President Trump and Elon Musk and the Doge team have uncovered. I think probably Afghan citizens will do just fine without workshops on Marcel Duchamp. I don't think that American taxpayers want to be funding this sort of thing. What's so shocking about the USAID discoveries is not that the U.S. is wielding soft influence around the world. Of course we do that. We're the global hegemon, perfectly rational for a nation to spread its interests around the world. The problem is what these interests are. In what way does paying off Rory Stewart's wife to give lectures on modern art to Afghan citizens, in what way does that advance the U.S. national interest or the broader Western interest? Or anyone's interests, really, other than these liberal politicians who have been on the take from USAID for many years. Totally ridiculous, and I don't think you're even seeing many people on the left side of the aisle defending these things, because 90% of the American voting public would say this is a misuse of money.
Well, in case you're not aware, Rory Stewart's not having a great year, having unsuccessfully also predicted that Kamala Harris would enjoy a sweeping victory at the US presidential election and basically been wrong on everything else over the last 5 years. But let's just zoom into Trump too, if we could, because we've got your unique insight on the show. Now, we're seeing, as we're talking, our own Prime Minister Keir Starmer meeting with Zelensky over Ukraine. Obviously, Trump is taking a very clear line, essentially closing Europe out of the negotiations, and certainly not involving Keir Starmer. I mean, what's your view as to how this negotiation with Russia proceeds and what it's telling us about Trump's broader philosophy here when it comes to ending the war in Ukraine?
Well, Mr. Starmer has made the claim that Vladimir Zelensky is the democratically elected leader of Ukraine. I guess that has been true. I'm not sure when we're going to get another election in Ukraine. There was supposed to be one last spring. That did not happen. You might say, okay, we can suspend elections, we can institute martial law during times of war, but for how long? What is the end of this war? President Trump has been accused of bragging or of exaggerating when he says that the war would not have begun on his watch. I think he is absolutely correct about that. There is one presidential administration in the past 20 years on whose watch Vladimir Putin has not further invaded another country. Wasn't George Bush, wasn't Barack Obama, wasn't Joe Biden. It was Donald Trump. And then Trump leaves office, Biden comes in, you get this invasion of Ukraine, and the whole war has been mishandled. So I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is the end here? Thus far, the grand strategy of the liberals on both sides of the Atlantic has been to keep Ukraine as a meat grinder, try to kill as many Russian soldiers as possible, and sacrifice the next generation of Ukrainians to do it. Okay, I understand the grand strategy. It's a little ghastly and gruesome, but I understand it well enough. But at what point are we going to say this needs to end? Because as long as this goes on, there is the risk of an escalation into a greater regional war or into a global conflict. Let's not forget, we are dealing with nuclear powers here. So I'm pleased to see that the liberals on the other side of the Atlantic and the liberals in our own country have basically left the picture here. The adults are back in charge, and I trust that there will be a serious conclusion. But one big warning to Zelensky. If Zelensky thinks that he's going to get himself a good deal by publicly attacking President Donald Trump, he's got another thing coming, and he should be voted out of office just for that political incompetence alone.
Yeah, Michael, the other big intervention that we've had here in Europe was obviously J.D. Vance coming over and dropping some very big truth bombs on Europe's elite when it comes to things like free speech, mass immigration, defense spending. Just tell us, if you can, what is the view within the White House when it comes to Europe, above and beyond Ukraine? So not only about the war, but I seem to be picking up a sort of sense of exasperation within Team Trump, a kind of sense of disillusionment, if you like, about Europe's contribution, or some might say lack of contribution, to actually making Western civilization great again?
Sure. Ronald Reagan flew to Germany and he gave his famous tear down this wall speech. I think what J.D. Vance gave in Munich was the tear down this firewall speech. He called out the Germans and the Europeans more broadly directly. He said, you people are afraid of your own citizens. You set up firewalls to stop your citizens from having a say over basic national questions. You arrest citizens, not just in continental Europe, but even in the UK, for praying in their own heads, in their own minds, silently, outside of abortion mills. You launch midnight raids in Germany on citizens for posting things that you don't like politically on Facebook. And what J.D. Vance said is, we're not going to underrate that anymore, okay? The United States is happy to be the leader of the free world, to provide the great lion's share of security for the West, but we are not going to subsidize the liberal European leaders undermining their own citizens and trampling on their legitimate rights. And I think that you've seen in your own country with the wonderful Brexit vote, you've seen throughout continental Europe in the election of Giorgia Meloni or in the election of Viktor Orban or many other right-wing leaders, you've seen this push by ordinary Europeans and Brits to say, this liberal status quo is not working for us. And in comes President Trump. We've had our own problems in that regard. He finally comes into power again with the majority of Americans behind him. And he says, you know what? We have a new sheriff in town, not just in Washington, but throughout the West broadly. And when the liberal elites at the Munich Security Conference were crying at the end of that conference, I think they had good reason to cry, because their corrupt political order is coming to an end.
Yeah, Michael, if I can, we've seen it's been sort of shock and awe in the early weeks of Trump too. We've seen the USA debate, the Doge, the government efficiency debate. We've seen action on the border. We've seen action on Ukraine. We've seen this talk about building the Riviera in the Middle East. I'm hesitant to ask this question, but what on earth is coming next?
It has felt as though these first 3 weeks have been 3 years. President Trump warned we would get tired of winning. I'm not tired of winning. I am a little bit tired, though. It is quite dizzying. And I think what you're going to see now is a real exercise of U.S. power. It's not my observation originally. Walter Kern, I think, was the first person I saw point this out, that we talk about the peaceful transfer of power so often, but really, in recent years, it's felt less like a transfer of power than it has a changing of the shifts from, say, Bush to Clinton to Bush to Obama. It's all kind of the same thing, people who broadly agree. President Trump's election is a shift in power, and that means you're going to get a new direction, a restoration of a traditional direction when it comes to immigration, when it comes to tariffs and trade, when it comes to global governance. Even just today, the fact that the U.S. State Department has classified 6 to 8 foreign drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations means that the United States now has a whole host of resources available, up to and including the military, to take out these groups. What President Trump has shown us above all is you can have good government. It's actually not even all that complicated. You just need the will to do it. And our liberal elites who've been running our respective societies for the past couple of decades now have simply not wanted to.
Yeah, I was struck by conservative writer Douglas Murray's comments this week in London. He said, well, if the last few decades will go down in history as the age of deconstruction, perhaps what is starting with Trump too is the age of reconstruction. Thank you, Michael Knowles, for joining us. Some fascinating insights from the US. Now, in a moment, Nigel Farage has issued a stark warning about the British birth rate crisis here on these islands and what he says could be the end of Judeo-Christian culture. But what can really be done to turn around the collapsing birth rate here in Britain? Find out in a moment.
Evening. Yes, it's time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. It's turned milder and it's going to be very mild through tomorrow, but won't feel as mild because it'll be quite breezy and yes, there's quite a bit of rain to come as well. There's a lot of weather fronts ganging up out in the Atlantic. They're moving in. The isobars are squeezing together, telling us the winds are picking up. Band of heavy rain crossing Scotland this evening. Northern England seeing some heavy downpours too. Might even hear a crack of thunder here and there. Just generally staying cloudy with outbreaks of rain on and off through the night. That breeze, the cloud, all helping to keep the temperatures up. A much milder night than we've had by morning. Temperatures 7 or 8 degrees in the east, double figures further south and west. But as I said, it won't necessarily feel that mild because it's going to be cloudy and for many a wet start to the day. That rain on and off across northern Scotland, but some drier spells. Another pulse of heavier rain coming into southwest Scotland and Northern Ireland. It could be a very wet start to the morning rush hour here. There'll be some heavier outbreaks of rain too, crossing western England and Wales. Parts of eastern England, generally dry but fairly drab. But as I say, you'll notice that jump in temperatures compared to recent mornings. Some of that showery rain will work its way into eastern England. Heavier pulses of rain, the brighter colours there across northern England, parts of Wales. Northern Ireland cheering up for a time, but then more showers come in here later on. Wales, western parts of England do look a bit brighter come the end of the day. And look at that, it's milder. Temperatures in double digits pretty much across the board, and many places getting into the teens. Friday also looking mild, but also looking wet. There's Met Office warnings in place for the wind and the rain across parts of the west, and it will be a very wet day in western areas. Much of the east of England staying dry on Friday until late on, but it's going to be a blustery day wherever you are. But those winds coming up from the south. So again, on Friday, it will be much, much milder than it has been.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back tonight to State of the Nation with me, Matt Goodwin, right here on GB News. Now, Nigel Farage has urged British people to have more children, calling for a need to cultivate greater positivity towards families. Yesterday, he condemned Rachel Reeves for what he called a declinist attitude, emphasising the importance of returning to Judeo-Christian family values that are essential to maintaining British identity. Nigel Farage said that we need a 180-degree shift to help overcome our declining birth rate that now sits at 1.44, well below the replacement rate of 2.1 births per woman, and forecast to reach just 1.3 by the end of this century. Now, I'm joined in the studio tonight by pro-natalist podcaster Malcolm Collins, as well as my panel, former MEP Patrick O'Flynn and the founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani. How do we fix this birth rate crisis?
First, I think people are hugely underestimating the scale of this. There was a study by Oxford that showed the fertility rate in the UK was 1.94 in 2010, and by 2022, it had fallen to 1.55. Again, it's fallen since then. If you project this fall going forwards, and you assume one generation every 30 years, that means for every 100 British people today, there's going to be 11.9 grandchildren and 1.8 great-grandchildren. The scope of this decline is horrifying. And we're seeing it not just in the developed world anymore, but in Latin America, where some demographers have used the term vertiginous to decline the fertility rate. The only thing that seems to be protective of fertility rates, and Nigel Farage is 100% correct about this, we have gotten a lot of countries that are further ahead on this collapse than we are, and we can look at them trying to do handouts, we can look at them trying to do state-backed daycare. None of it seems to work. The only thing that seems to work is religion. Or culture, if you want to call it
so
that.
Let me just, so you look at countries like Poland and Hungary, they're saying, well, let's give tax breaks, let's give 0% loans, let's do the money stuff. What you're saying is basically the evidence, and I've looked at the evidence as well, the evidence isn't really there. You don't get a big uptick in the number of kids. What you're saying is if you want to resolve this dilemma, the answer is in culture, not economics.
It's in, more than that, it's in protecting high fertility cultural subgroups, which are usually conservative and religious. I mean, I think one of the things that we have to ask around fertility is, When you look at the fertility rate among progressives, whether it's in the UK or the US, they have very low fertility rates. So where are they getting their new members from? They are deconverting people from high fertility cultural groups.
So just to be clear, so I can read between the lines, what you're saying is the woke will die out.
Eventually, yes. But some European countries might die out in the process.
I shouldn't celebrate that fact, but there we are. OK, so we're going to turn around to culture. So these are things, some suggestions that people here, like Miriam Cates and others, have made. Well, why don't we start teaching children in primary and secondary school about things like the biological clock, the need to have children, the demographic crisis facing Western nations? Could we not start doing stuff like that? Would that not help?
I think that would have an enormous impact if you framed people who had kids as, in the same way we frame people who do like environmentalist stuff these days and stuff like that, making a sacrifice on behalf of the country and the future.
Well, that's what I mean. I mean, if you look at the issue of, say, environmentalism or smoking, we have changed the culture. So why can't we change the culture on the issue of having children?
Well, you can. I mean, but the problem is it goes fundamentally against the interest of those who have control of the educational system, which is to perpetuate their own culture, which is the urban monoculture, which is wokeism, whatever you want to call it, which has to be fundamentally hostile to fertility because it doesn't replicate itself through motivating reproduction. It replicates itself through parasitizing demographically healthy cultural subgroups.
Patrick, the answer is culture, not economics. We have to fix this problem, otherwise there is going to be disaster.
Yes, we do, and I think economics can play a role. For instance, we've withdrawn child benefit from successful, self-sufficient financial couples, that we scrape their child benefit away. We obviously have our housing costs explosion, which is a huge factor. I do think the underlying most powerful factor is we live in a culture of self-realisation rather than any sense of obligation to a wider national community. I think the feeling of social solidarity and the wider national community has been shot to pieces by both our approach to community integration, but also mainly by our ridiculous immigration policy of the last 25 years.
Aaron, what is, from the left, even, people think that, I would hope would accept this is one of the most pressing policy problems we face. How do we fix it?
Well, I'm probably not the best person to ask from the left, because I agree that it's a major problem, and I agree that we need to be thinking about it more politically. What I also say is I disagree with you that what's been done by Hungary doesn't work. I think that's kind of outdated. Hungary basically has a birth rate of around, or fertility rate rather, about 1.5, but it stayed still. And actually, there was a report by HSBC, they said the UK is going to fall to a fertility rate of 1 by the end of the 2030s. So I think this idea that, well, the Central Europeans aren't quite doing it, I don't think that's quite right. I look at all the people I know, friends I know, they have one kid, and they say, if I could get the means, I would have a second and a third. And I do think that's something. Now, you could talk about the culture, and that's probably true. Can we get past 2.1 again? I think probably not. But each point that it goes up, 1.6 is better than 1.5, 1.7 is better than 1.6, is an achievement. And I think economics is part of actually getting it up.
Malcolm, if you look at the long-term projections in this country, the British people are not growing. Our population growth is now exclusively driven by immigration. This is becoming incredibly pressing for this country.
So I saw a report recently saying that, over the next 10 years, Britain is going to grow by 4.9 million people. How is that going to happen when you have a fertility rate of 1.44? It is a plan for massive immigration to attempt to resolve this issue. And I will note on the economic stuff, generally, between and within countries, the less money a person has, the more kids they have. When people say, I can't afford more kids, what they mean is, I can't afford more kids without sacrificing my current quality of life. And I view my current quality of life as being more important than perpetuating my culture into the future. And that's a very easy position for people to take when they've been taught to hate their culture.
Yeah, briefly, Aaron,
There's a massive opportunity cost for more affluent people to have kids, and we don't support them. Literally, if you earn more than 100 grand in this country, you end up being 8 grand worse off because you lose free nursery care, you lose child benefits. So I do think there are big disincentives for wealthier or just middle class people to have more kids. So I think it's a bit of both, but I think we have a really profoundly strange system in this country.
Thank you to my panel. Thank you to Malcolm for coming to discuss this pressing issue. Now, up next is Patrick Christys. Patrick, what have you got on your show this evening?
Well, loads on. We are expecting to hear live from President Trump. It's been a busy day for the guy, hasn't he? So we will be taking that to you as and when we get it. Keir Starmer, I'm asking, why is he obsessed with Islam? He made another faux pas last night by having a lady who said that ISIS was preferable to Islamophobia sitting next to him at a meeting. Illegal migrants are now sending their young children, as young as 6, across the channel on their own, and then using those children to try to claim asylum here themselves. I think, to be honest with you, that's child abuse, isn't it? But also, a black bisexual woman has now been cast in the role as Jesus Christ. Is that horrific woke blasphemy? What do you make of that?
Splendid, Patrick, splendid. Well, that's all coming up after the weather. Make sure you tune in. I'm going to be back next week. I'm Matt Goodwin. This has been State of the Nation right here on GB News. Stay safe. See you soon.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening. Yes, it's time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. It's turned milder and it's going to be very mild through tomorrow, but won't feel as mild because it'll be quite breezy and yes, there's quite a bit of rain to come as well. There's a lot of weather fronts ganging up out in the Atlantic. They're moving in. The isobars are squeezing together, telling us the winds are picking up. Band of heavy rain crossing Scotland this evening. Northern England seeing some heavy downpours too. Might even hear a crack of thunder here and there. Just generally staying cloudy with outbreaks of rain on and off through the night. That breeze, the cloud, all helping to keep the temperatures up. A much milder night than we've had by morning. Temperatures 7 or 8 degrees in the east, double figures further south and west. But as I said, it won't necessarily feel that mild because it's going to be cloudy and for many a wet start to the day. That rain on and off across northern Scotland, but some drier spells. Another pulse of heavier rain coming into southwest Scotland and Northern Ireland. It could be a very wet start to the morning rush hour here. There'll be some heavier outbreaks of rain too, crossing western England and Wales. Parts of eastern England, generally dry but fairly drab. But as I say, you'll notice that jump in temperatures compared to recent mornings. Some of that showery rain will work its way into eastern England. Heavier pulses of rain, the brighter colours there across northern England, parts of Wales. Northern Ireland cheering up for a time, but then more showers come in here later on. Wales, western parts of England do look a bit brighter come the end of the day. And look at that, it's milder. Temperatures in double digits pretty much across the board, and many places getting into the teens. Friday also looking mild, but also looking wet. There's Met Office warnings in place for the wind and the rain across parts of the west, and it will be a very wet day in western areas. Much of the east of England staying dry on Friday until late on, but it's going to be a blustery day wherever you are. But those winds coming up from the south, so again on Friday it will be much, much milder than it has been.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We're giving you not one, but 2 chances to win this month with 2 prize bundles that include an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash.